They found it growing in an empty lot in Kentucky, a tall, spiny weed with milky sap and jagged leaves, towering over the cracked concrete like it had no idea it wasn't supposed to be there. Most people walked right past it. A few might have pulled it out, cursed it, tossed it in a trash bag, but one man stopped, and he knew exactly what he was looking at. Because this weed, this overlooked, unglamorous roadside plant, has a history that stretches back thousands of years. A history of healing, of controversy, of being used, forgotten, rediscovered, and quietly pushed aside again. It's been called nature's opium. It's been sketched into the margins of ancient Egyptian manuscripts. It sat in the medicine cabinets of 19th century doctors, right alongside morphine, and today it grows freely across the United States. Completely legal, completely wild, and almost completely unknown to the average person. Its name is wild lettuce, and once you know what it is, you're going to start seeing it everywhere. So why don't more people know about it? Why did something with this much history, this much cultural weight, essentially vanish from mainstream awareness? That's the question we're going to answer today, and I promise you, the answer is more layered, more human, and more fascinating than you might expect. Let's start with the plant itself, Lactuca virosa. That's its scientific name. It's a member of the daisy family, which already sounds wrong, because there's nothing delicate about this plant. It can grow up to 6 feet tall. Its stem is thick, hollow, and covered in small reddish spines along the bottom. Its leaves are broad and deeply lobed, with a similar spine running along the midrib on the underside. When you break the stem, and here's the part that makes people do a double take, it bleeds. A thick, white, latex-like sap oozes out from the wound, slowly, steadily, like the plant is bleeding milk. That sap has a name, lactucarium, and that is the substance at the center of everything we're about to talk about. Wild lettuce grows across much of Europe and Western Asia, but it has naturalized extensively throughout North America. You can find it in the eastern and midwestern United States, in disturbed soils, along roadsides, on the edges of fields, in vacant lots and garden borders. It's not hiding in deep forests or rare mountain ecosystems. It's right there, at the edges of ordinary life, blending in with the weeds people stop seeing because they've seen them too many times. And that might be the most remarkable thing about this plant. It's not exotic. It's not endangered. It doesn't require a trek through a rainforest to find. It grows in Kentucky, it grows in Ohio, it grows in the strip of weedy ground between a parking lot and a fence in rural Tennessee. Most people walk past it every single day. But here's where things get strange, or rather, where they get old. Because the story of wild lettuce doesn't start in the 21st century. It doesn't start in the 19th century either. To find the beginning of this story, you have to go back roughly 3,000 years, maybe more. Ancient Egyptians were using plants from the lettuce family in ways that had nothing to do with salads. Wall carvings and manuscripts reference wild, elongated lettuce plants in contexts tied to ritual, medicine, and the god Min, a deity associated with fertility and regeneration. Some researchers believe the ancient Egyptians were already aware of the psychoactive and sedating properties of wild lettuce. They cultivated and used it in ways that suggested they understood it wasn't just food. Then the Greeks got hold of it. Theophrastus, the father of botany, wrote about wild lettuce in the 4th century BC. The physician Dioscorides mentioned it. Galen, one of the most influential physicians in all of ancient history, reportedly used wild lettuce as a sedative and sleep aid. There are historical accounts suggesting that the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, a man with no shortage of stress in his life, running a vast empire while fighting wars on multiple fronts, relied on a preparation involving wild lettuce to help him sleep. That's not folklore. That's documented history. And so for centuries, this plant moved through the ancient world as a known, respected medicine, something that healers understood, prepared, and administered with purpose. The milky sap, that lactucarium, was the key ingredient, gathered by scoring the plant's stem, letting the sap dry into a resinous brown substance, and then using that substance in various preparations. Now here's something I want to be very clear about, because this is where the plant's reputation gets tangled up in misunderstanding. Wild lettuce is not opium. Lactucarium is not an opioid. It does not contain morphine, codeine, or any of the compounds found in the opium poppy. The nickname nature's opium was never meant to be chemically accurate. It was descriptive. Historically, people noticed that the plant seemed to have calming, pain-dulling, slightly sedating effects, and they reach for the most familiar comparison they had. In the 19th century, that comparison was opium, but the mechanism is entirely different. The active compounds in lactucarium, primarily lacticin and lactucopacrin, are bitter sesquiterpene lactones. They're found in smaller amounts in regular garden lettuce too, which is part of why a big salad can make you feel sleepy. Researchers studying these compounds in animal models have found evidence of analgesic and sedative effects. The compounds appear to work through pathways involving the central nervous system, but they are not opiates. They do not cause the same kind of dependence, and they are not in the same pharmacological category. This distinction matters a lot because it's part of why wild lettuce has been chronically misunderstood, both by people who fear it and people who oversell it. By the 19th century, wild lettuce and its extracted lactucarium had carved out a legitimate place in Western medicine. It was listed in the British Pharmacopoeia. It appeared in American medical texts. Pharmacists stocked it. Physicians prescribed it, particularly as a milder alternative to opium for patients who needed pain relief or sleep support without the full weight of an opiate prescription. There were advocates who believed it was nearly as effective as opium for certain applications, with far less risk. There were critics who thought the whole thing was overblown and inconsistent. Sound familiar? This debate, natural remedy versus pharmaceutical standard, is not new. It was already happening in the 1800s, in medical journals, in physician correspondence, in the early infrastructure of modern medicine. And then something happened. Several things, actually. First came the rise of pharmaceutical standardization. Modern medicine, in its push toward rigor and reproducibility, which are genuinely good things, began demanding that medicines have consistent, measurable doses. And wild lettuce, like most herbal medicines, struggled enormously with this demand. The potency of lactucarium varied wildly depending on where the plant was grown, what time of year it was harvested, how it was processed, how long it had been stored. You couldn't hand a physician a bottle of wild lettuce extract and guarantee he was giving his patient a consistent dose. You could with morphine, you could with codeine, and so gradually the pharmacological establishment drifted toward what it could control. Second, the legal landscape around drugs shifted dramatically in the early 20th century. The Harrison Narcotics Act of 1914, the later development of federal drug scheduling. These changes didn't specifically target wild lettuce. It was never scheduled, never made illegal, but they created an environment in which anything that even sounded like it might be related to opiates came under enormous scrutiny. Wild lettuce, with its nature's opium nickname, its milky sap, its centuries-long association with sedation and pain relief, was not going to thrive in that climate. And third, perhaps most importantly, no one was funding serious research into it. Pharmaceutical companies fund research into compounds they can patent, develop, refine, and sell. You cannot patent a weed that grows in a vacant lot in Ohio. There was no economic engine to drive the research that might have validated wild lettuce's effects, standardized its use, or given it a legitimate clinical foothold in modern medicine. And so, without funding, without research, without pharmaceutical champions, it faded. It dropped out of pharmacopeias. It was removed from official medical references. Doctors stopped learning about it. And within a few generations, it had gone from a documented entry in Western medical literature to something most physicians had never heard of. That's not a conspiracy. That's just economics. And in some ways, that's even more unsettling than a conspiracy, because it means the decisions that shaped what we know and don't know about plant medicine were made by invisible market forces, not by scientific judgment. So where does wild lettuce stand today? It exists in a kind of legal and cultural middle ground. It's not scheduled. It's not regulated as a drug. You can buy it as an herbal supplement in dried form, as tinctures, as teas. It's sold openly online and in health food stores. Herbalists have never fully abandoned it. In traditional and folk medicine communities, knowledge of wild lettuce persisted even when mainstream medicine moved on. And in the last decade or so, there's been a significant and genuine resurgence of interest. Drive through the comment sections of herbalism forums, homesteading videos, or natural health communities, and you'll find people talking about wild lettuce with the energy of someone who just discovered something the rest of the world is sleeping on. Some of that energy is warranted. Some of it overshoots the evidence considerably. Here's the honest, grounded version. The scientific evidence for wild lettuce's effects in humans is limited. Studies on the active compounds, lacticin, and lactucarium, have shown promising results in animal models. One study demonstrated analgesic and sedative effects in mice. Other research has looked at anti-inflammatory properties. But rigorous, large-scale, human clinical trials essentially don't exist. What we have is a long historical record of use, some promising but preliminary compound-level research, and a massive body of anecdotal reports from people who say it helps them sleep, calms their anxiety, or takes the edge off mild pain. That's not nothing. Historical use and anecdotal evidence are legitimate signals. They're often how modern medicine finds new leads worth pursuing, but they're not the same as proof. And anyone who tells you that wild lettuce is a proven medical treatment is getting ahead of the science. What's also true is that, like any biologically active plant, wild lettuce is not harmless by default. Natural does not mean safe in any amount. High doses of any bioactive compound can cause problems. This is a plant with real effects on the nervous system, and it deserves to be treated with the same respect and caution you'd give any medicine, not grabbed and consumed casually because it grows in a field. But the resurgence is real, and it's driven by something deeper than just curiosity about one plant. It's part of a broader cultural moment, a growing sense across very different kinds of people that we've outsourced too much of our health knowledge, that somewhere in the gap between ancient wisdom and pharmaceutical modernity, we lost things worth recovering, that the relationship between plants and humans, one that sustained our species for hundreds of thousands of years, might still have something to teach us if we're willing to pay attention. Wild lettuce didn't disappear because it was proven useless. It disappeared because it was inconvenient, because it couldn't be standardized, patented, or profited from in the ways that modern medicine required, and that distinction between unproven and unprofitable is one worth sitting with, because there's a difference between something that doesn't work and something that was never adequately studied. And there's a difference between something that's dangerous and something that's simply unfamiliar. Wild lettuce is still out there, right now somewhere in the eastern United States, in a weedy margin at the edge of a field or a forgotten corner of someone's backyard. A tall, spiny plant with milky sap is reaching toward the sky. It's been doing that, undisturbed and unhurried, through the rise of the pharmaceutical industry, through drug wars and regulation and the complete restructuring of how we think about medicine. It was there before any of that, and it's still there now. The ancient Egyptians knew this plant. Marcus Aurelius knew this plant. 19th century physicians who were trying to find something gentler than opium knew this plant, and somewhere along the way, we forgot. Maybe the most radical thing we can do right now isn't to build something new. Maybe it's to slow down, to look more carefully at what's already growing around us, to ask better questions about what we've dismissed and why. Because sometimes the most powerful things in the world aren't locked in a laboratory or hidden behind a prescription. Sometimes they're growing right under our feet. And that's what this channel's all about, honey. The forgotten, the overlooked, and the hidden in plain sight. If that resonates with you, hit subscribe and come back every week for more. Now I want to hear from you. Did you already know about wild lettuce? Or is this the first time you're hearing about it? Drop it in the comments below, because I read every single one.